Hey guys, this is a video review of In the Year of the Dragon. This is my first video review, so forgive me if I leave anything out. I realized there was no decent review for this game in English, so I decided to make one. A little background about myself: I love worker placement games. Agricola and Le Havre I consider very solid games. I also own Fresco and Kingsburg. I feel those are about 8s. I also own Stone Age, which is I feel about a 7 or so. I'll first give a quick overview of the game. I'll talk about components, then I'll discuss how the game works, and finally a little bit about what I think about the game. In the Year of the Dragon is a game where each player takes on the role of a Chinese prince that is trying to survive 12 months, which are represented by events. There are 2 of each event, and most of these events are bad. Each player will choose from a variety of subjects and call upon their services for help. Players will carefully take actions, and the player that survives these events the best and scores the most victory points wins the game. Components. The rulebook is pretty self-explanatory. There are just a few oddly worded phrases, but for the most part, pretty easy to understand. Most of the components are very well made. All the cardboard chits are nice. You have your events, which will be shuffled once at the beginning of the game and displayed down here. Your action tiles, which will be shuffled before every turn and displayed here. Your people tiles, which you will pick from once a turn. There are coins, which are your currency. They have holes, which is a nice touch. Privilege tiles, fireworks resources, rice resources, palace floors, which are also nice since they stack just like that. You also have 1 dragon per player, which will represent what action you take. Cards that you play from your hand are over here. The game also comes with cards with the game overview and an action overview and etc. I'll get into that a little bit later. You have 2 different tracks on the board: a victory point track, which is pretty standard, and a person track. This determines turn order, and I'll get more on that later. Finally, there's a discard pile for all of your cards on the board. The components that I would have liked to be a little bit better is the board itself. It lacks in artwork and doesn't stay completely flat. I had to put a book on it for a little while to get it down to this level. The wooden pieces for the score tracker and the person tracker aren't bad per se, but they could be a little bit better. The cards you play from your hand are very small. These types of cards always seem to be too fiddly with somebody with bigger hands. But considering this isn't a very large board, the smaller cards do fit the small scale of things. Everyone starts with 2 palaces with 2 stories each. They also start with 2 people, which, when they pick them in the beginning, cannot be the same combination as any player before them. And you start out with 6 money. I'll get into turn overview in just a minute, but I wanted to talk about building requirements first. The palaces can hold only as many floors, the palaces can only hold as many people as it has floors. Palaces have a maximum of 3 floors, and there is no limit on how many palaces you can have. When you build new palace floors, you can choose to place new floors on top of existing ones, or create new palaces altogether. At the end of every turn, you will score 1 point per palace. More palaces means more points per turn, but it can also hurt you, and I'll get more on that later. Also, turn order is extremely important in this game. Remember the person track I talked about? This is determined by which people you employ in your palaces. Each person has a number. By choosing the person for their benefit, they will also move so many spaces on the person track. The player highest on the person track will get to go first in each of the phases of that turn, followed by the next highest, and so on. For 6 of the person tiles, there is a younger and older person to choose from. The older person are usually more efficient in the benefit they provide you. However, the younger person will get you higher on the person track. These are some very interesting decisions that really make the game unique. The person track is important to keep an eye on. You'll find yourself making decisions to move ahead on the person track to be first, or simply to stay close with the rest of the pack, because you don't want to be left behind and go last every time. Alright, down to the turn overview. This game is very easy to learn how to play. The actions are shuffled and randomly placed into groups depending on how many players there are. Each player chooses an action, plays a card from their hand, and takes the appropriate person tile. The event is resolved, and then there is scoring after each round. That's it. 4 phases. Action, person, event, scoring. You do this for 12 rounds with a few exceptions. You don't play a card on the last round because everyone runs out of cards. And at the very end, there's some end game scoring. I'm going to discuss the actions, events, and people at the same time so you can see why you need certain things and how all the actions interact with the events and so forth. When choosing an action, you place your dragon on the group that the action is in and perform one of the actions in that group. If you decide to pick a group that has a dragon on it from a previous player, you have to pay 3 coins to the bank to do so. Since money is scarce, you can see why paying attention to turn order, controlling it, and not falling behind is important. The first action is build. You take 1 palace floor from the supply for each of the hammer symbols you have. For example, if you have 2 builders in your palaces, you get 1 palace floor for the action and 2 more from your builders. This is the fireworks display action. You take 1 firework tile from the action and 1 additional for each of the symbols on your person tiles, the pyrotechnists. The older providing more fireworks than the younger, but less spaces on the person track. This action is useful for the Dragon Festival event. The player with the most fireworks gets 6 victory points. The player with the second most gets 3 victory points, and that's it. You don't score any points beyond that, and you don't score any points if you don't have any fireworks. Once the points are moved on the victory point track, players discard half of their firework tiles, rounding up. The next action is harvest. You get 1 rice tile from the action and 1 additional for each symbol on your farmer person tile that you own. This is useful for the drought event. You will need to turn in 1 rice tile for each inhabited palace that you own. For every palace that you cannot supply, you lose 1 person from that palace of your choosing. Thus, choosing when and how to build new palaces or add on to existing ones becomes very strategic. More palaces gets you more points per turn, but twice in the game, the drought event will require as many rice as you have inhabited palaces, and you will lose people if you can't cough up enough rice. The next action is taxes. You get 2 coins from the action itself and 1 additional coin for the symbols on your tax collector person tiles. Coins are useful for a few things. 1 for taking actions in groups that players have already placed their dragons on. Also, coins are useful in the event Imperial Tribute. Every player must pay 4 coins, and for every coin that they are unable to pay, they must lose 1 person. The next action is privilege. You can pay 2 coin for a small privilege tile, or 6 coin for a large tile. Every turn during scoring, a small tile provides you 1 victory point, while a large tile provides you 2 victory points per turn. The next action is research. You will score 1 victory point immediately for the action, and 1 additional immediately for the symbols you have on your scholar tiles. The next action is military parade. This moves 1 space on the person track for the action and 1 additional for each symbol on your warrior person tiles. This is useful for the event Mongol Invasion. The player with the fewest number of helmets loses 1 person. This is a very interesting action, moving along the person track. This helps you catch up with everyone else. You may not be the first, second, or third when choosing your action, but choosing the military parade can move you up on the person track allowing you to play a person card before others in the person phase of that round. Since there's a scarcity of person tiles, this can potentially be very important. It also helps you in the action phase in the following round, since you would have moved up on the person track, allowing you to play actions before others. Those are all the actions. The remaining people are healers. These are useful for the Contagion event. During this event, every player loses 3 people, but you lose 1 fewer for each of the mortar symbols you have on your healer person tiles. Another person is the Court Lady. She gives you 1 point per turn at the end of each round for every lady that you have. The last person is the Monk. These result in endgame points. You multiply the number of Buddhas by the number of floors in the palace they inhabit. While they have no other benefit during the game, the young monk has the highest person track number, and choosing him can give you an edge on the person track. The 2 events that the game starts with is Peace, which nothing happens. It basically buys you time to build up your engine and prepare for events down the line. At the end of each event, there is Decay, which means any uninhabited multi-floor palaces lose 1 floor, and any uninhabited 1-floor palaces disappear. This too plays into how and when you build your palaces. Then scoring happens at the end of each round. Players score 1 point for every palace, inhabited or uninhabited, 1 point for every privilege tile, and 1 point for every court lady. That happens 12 times. Then the end game scoring takes place. Each person tile you own is 2 points, which is why losing people is detrimental. You lose the benefit that they have during the game, and you also lose their end game points. Also scored end game is the Monk, which I previously described. And you also score points for any remaining money that you have. You can sell back your rice and fireworks for 2 coins each, and for every 3 coins you have, gives you 1 victory point. That's about it. I like this game because it has great depth, more than what you might think from the outlook, and it is a relatively short game compared to Agricola or Le Havre. Even though you're only picking 1 action and 1 person per turn, you are making many more decisions than just that. Which action you choose? Are you going to pay 3 coins for a badly needed action? Which person are you going to pick? Prepare for an event now or prepare later. Pick an older person for efficiency or pick a younger person to help turn order. Which people are you going to release when you lose a person? And from which palace? How are you going to build your palaces? Build on existing ones or build new ones? Strategy-wise, do you want a steady flow of points per turn? Or do you want a huge endgame bonus? Do you simply want to survive all the events and not lose anyone? This game has great tension. It's short, it's got some really interesting and interactive mechanics, and I feel it'll be a game that will hit the table quite often with some of my other favorites. I give this game a 9. That's about it. Thanks for listening.